Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome to both shows, the podcast and the video show at this point. But thank you for coming to my house.
I'm so honored. This is a beautiful house with an amazing view.
It's funny. So we connected, I think, through the show, right?
Yeah.
Through the podcast.
Yeah.
I guess you started listening,
Yep.
reached out, and then when we met up for lunch, we found out that we had some more connections in our past, which makes me wonder if LA is just such a small town. I mean, it's not, but it feels like it. So I want to hear a little bit of your backstory. So let's go back a little bit. Tell me about your path to becoming a lawyer, and you can go in depth as in depth as you want.
First of all, I'm gonna fangirl a little bit. So as Nicole mentioned, I first learned about her in the podcast over 2 years ago when I was kind of in a really bad place about my career. And I was just Googling, should I even be a lawyer? Like, what do I do with my life after having this legal education?
All the questions that Google should be asked, right?
Yes. And I, came across her podcast and it was almost like therapeutic I listened to you religiously through my commutes.
Oh, man.
I felt like we were friends, like we were going through the same issues, and you were like providing all these really helpful resources. And so it's just kind of, I would say, like, thanks to you and your podcast that 2-3 years later, I'm like thriving in my legal career. So thank you.
I mean, I would like to take credit, but no, not at all. No, I'm glad I didn't turn you against the law. I didn't make you want to leave, because I think for a while when I was kind of in an unhappy place, I think people could hear it in my tone that I was just very unhappy, and I don't know. I hope I didn't lead too many lawyers to want to quit. But yeah, you're right. You are here, you are thriving, and there's a lot that we want to dive into in terms of what you've done, what you've managed to do with your career, but also the interesting little niche that you got into, which I'd love to hear more about. So tell me more of what you're doing right now.
Okay, so to kind of go back to my backstory, I went to law school because my dad told me to. I wanted to actually be a foreign service officer. So that is someone who works for the federal government, lives overseas at U.S. embassies, and is actually like adjudicating the visa applications in embassies overseas. That was my dream job. Travel the world, have a stable job, work for the government, do something sexy. Like, that's what I wanted to do. And then when I was ready to interview for the position, my dad was like, please don't do it. I've never asked you for anything in your life, but this is my one request. You are my only daughter and my favorite child. I don't want you living overseas apart from me for the rest of your life. And who can say no to that, right? So he's like, please go to law school. And so I did. Went to law school mainly because my dad told me to, and I figured if I didn't like it, it's going to be a valuable education no matter what. And if I didn't like it, I'd still be young enough to go back to the Foreign Service if necessary. I started law school at the height of the economic downturn. I think it was 2009, 2010.
Okay.
And so when I talked to people who were in law school ahead of me, I asked them for advice, how do I make sure I have a job when I graduate? And every single person I spoke with told me, get hands-on practical work experience while you are in school. Your brains are not going to help you. It's going to be your hands, the fact that you have actually done the work before. And so I changed my enrollment from full-time to part-time law school. So that would allow me to work full-time during the day at law firms and then go to school at night. And just the first job that would have me would happen to be an immigration law firm.
Okay. Did you go to law school straight out of college, or was there?
I spent a year in Japan.
Okay.
After college, because again, there were no jobs in 2008, 2009 after college. So I spent a year in Japan teaching English, applied to law schools while I was there, and then got in. So I came back after a year. I think we're at the same timeline, right?
Yeah. But I was going to say your decision seemed really mature. That's why I asked that, because I don't know too many lawyers or too many law students who were like, okay, let me just go part-time when they could have gone full-time, just so they can work and actually get that experience at the same time. So I thought maybe you had some life experience behind you.
No. I think it was actually circumstances kind of necessitated that I go part-time and work and kind of support myself, because I I was in a long-term relationship at the time, and I figured I was probably going to marry this guy. And I needed to import him from Japan. And so I thought, okay, well, someone's got to pay the bills because he's not going to be able to work or find a job or speak English for a while. So I think thinking like a few years ahead, I was like, okay, I can't be a full-time student. Like I need to be able to put food on the table for the both of us for a while. So.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Smart.
So yeah, the first job I ended up in was in an immigration law firm. And I figured my plan was to kind of dabble in everything, like criminal, business, litigation, whatever. But I just kind of fell in love with immigration. I mean, how can you not? Like, just.
I mean, I've worked on 2 immigration cases, and you're right. I like them.
Just like being able to work very directly with the person that you are helping, being exposed to different cultures and different languages, and I guess I got that feeling of being able to travel around the globe without actually having to travel around the globe. So yeah, I just fell in love with immigration and stuck with it. But as you know, I just, got really jaded with the practice of law. It didn't make me happy. It was like really frustrating, really stressing me out. And I got to a point where I was like, why did I even go to law school? Like, why did I even become a lawyer? Like, this is the worst decision I ever made in my life.
How long after graduating was that?
So it was after I had graduated from law school, passed the bar, and I'd been practicing about a year.
Okay.
And I just so many things about the practice of law just drove me insane.
Okay.
For example, like having to wear a suit and driving to a fancy downtown office to sit in a glass box for 12 hours, but only being able to bill 8 hours and track every 6 minutes of my time and not get credit for the amazing work that I was doing because it's the senior partner or the senior associate, and then get thrown under the bus when something happens by the senior partner or a senior associate. It just, a lot of it didn't make sense to me. I think as a millennial, I love it when things are fast-paced. I love it when things are efficient, when we can leverage technology to improve people's lives. I would say a very kind of a telling moment for me that this was not the place for me was I had discovered some software, and it wasn't a software that was built for the law practice. It was like a task management or project management software. And I had talked about if we implement this software in our practice, we'd be more efficient throughout the practice. We could bill the clients less because we're being more efficient. And then, like, it's a win-win situation for everybody.
Not for the partner.
Yeah.
Billing less is not a good thing.
Yes. And then the lawyers who were in leadership were like, why would we want to do that?
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, this is not the environment for me. Like, for me personally as a lawyer, like, I feel kind of duty-bound to make immigration services as like accessible as possible, and part of that is being efficient with the client's time and the client's resources, and so that was kind of like a very telling point for me, and at the same time, like, my health really started to suffer. Like, the physical manifestations of the stress and the wrong fit was really like messing up my health, and I got to a point where, like, I just couldn't work anymore. Like, the stress was aggravating, like, a congenital heart condition that I had.
Wow.
And so I had to resign from my position. But just, like, fortuitously, I got a job offer from a startup company that, was kind of the perfect fit for me because it wasn't as stressful as like the practice of law. Yeah. There would still be a little bit of law practice involved.
Okay, so it wasn't for like or general counsel kind of position.
It was an in-house counsel position, but the company was so small. It was like 4 employees at that point that, like, I was doing everything from getting coffee to doing interviews to, like, I was doing everything.
Yeah.
but it was so much fun. And I learned so much from software engineers, from graphic designers, from UI UX designers, from content creators, and learned about like growing and building a business from scratch. Like we went from 4 employees to 24 employees in 2 years.
Wow.
And so it was so much fun. I learned so much.
What type of startup was it?
So they basically built mobile apps for other startups.
Okay.
And so I got exposed to all these like creative, like new and innovative and like really like society changing applications. And the work was really inspiring. It was so fun. And I was learning a lot, and it was fast paced, which is what I wanted.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then I was there for about 2 years. And then I had a baby.
Okay.
And then that startup grind was just like not sustainable anymore. Like commuting 40 minutes one way while like pumping and breastfeeding and not sleeping at night because the baby's not sleeping through the night, and then having to use all your vacation time to go to doctor's appointments. That kind of lifestyle just wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't giving me the freedom and the flexibility to be as available as a mom that I wanted to be.
Right.
And it just so happened with the timing that it was right when President Trump got elected.
Okay.
And throughout his campaign trail, he, made promises and promised to make good on those promises of kind of upending the immigration infrastructure as we know it. And I just felt this very like I was set on fire. Like I was like, I need to be on the front lines, like kind of fighting back and protecting my people.
I like on goosebumps. Yeah. No, I think a lot of lawyers kind of got re-energized, I suppose, or kind of riled up by what was happening.
Yeah. So the timing just kind of worked out where, at the time I submitted my resignation, it was January, 2018 when he came into office, and I decided, okay, like now is like the perfect timing to start my own firm and get back into the practice of law full time. So that's when I started my own firm, primarily serving the business immigration community, which is companies who are trying to get work visas for their employees. So I didn't really do any deportation defense. I didn't do any, asylum or like humanitarian work. It was 100%, I would say, working with software companies, tech companies, corporations that are doing extremely valuable things for our nation. And just the fact of the matter was there isn't enough American talent to fill those STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math jobs. And so they need the brains and the experience of foreign nationals. Yeah. So those are my primary clients.
So these were American companies that were just looking for talent elsewhere.
American companies, multinational companies, companies in like the biomedical space, just companies that were doing amazing things and literally were advertising for, engineers and researchers and scientists, like all over the nation, and we're not getting any qualified applicants. Okay. So that's what I was doing. But about 3-4 months into my solo practice, I got connected with an esports lawyer. So esports is, in other words, professional video gaming. And this lawyer kind of created the first law firm that is dedicated solely to advising esports teams and organizations. And
how'd you get connected? Met him by chance?
Well, long story is I mentored someone in law school through the school's like mentorship program, and that the person I mentored, to be quite honest, like sorry Gerard, you played too many video games and you weren't studying. So throughout law school I would be like, dude, you need to focus, you need to stop playing video games and just hit the books. And we have a really great relationship. Like we still talk to this day. I still mentor him to this day. And he graduated and was applying to jobs, and he had still maintained his love for video games, and he applied for a job at this esports law firm, but didn't get it because he didn't have he didn't have enough immigration experience. Okay. And so my mentee, told me like, hey, I just, applied to this job, but they told me I didn't have enough immigration experience. And I thought of you, even if you don't want to work for him, because I know you have your own practice, like, I think he'd be a really interesting person to connect with. So I just emailed him, and we met up for drinks and just like hit it off. Like, we were very like our values, our values really aligned. Both of us are very much about just doing right by our clients, being fast paced and responsive. Like, even if we're not the best like legal minds in the world, we still want our clients at the end of the day to feel like my lawyer was available and did the best job that he or she could for me. And that's really important to both of us. So we kind of like, at first we were just meeting to like talk and get to know each other, but at the end of the evening, it was kind of like, we should really work together. Because one of the pain points that his clients were facing was immigration lawyers didn't really understand the industry, the esports industry. Immigration lawyers weren't responding fast enough. For example, if a professional, League of Legends player has a competition coming up in 3 weeks, and they need a visa within the next 3 weeks, the typical law firm would, from the point of getting an inquiry from the team saying, we need a visa for X player in 3 weeks, it takes a week for that email to go from like the senior partner to the senior associate, and then a week for the senior associate to pass it off to like a senior paralegal, and then another week for the paralegal to prepare the forms and pass it off to a legal assistant. It's just, they were just not meeting the needs of their clients. And I told Bryce, the esports lawyer, I was like, I can put together an application in 1 to 3 business days. Like, there's no need. Like, it's, I'm a one-woman shop. Like, there's no need for me to pass things off and on. And for me, as long as I have an internet connection, and a computer, I can do my job from anywhere in the world. And I'm just extremely efficient with the processes and the procedures I have in place because I leverage technology. And so we started working together, and it's actually, today is our 1-year anniversary.
Oh, nice. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. It's been...
You should be there celebrating with us. It's like you're here instead.
It's been an amazing journey, just getting to know the esports industry and the players and developing a relationship with them, and going to these professional like competitions. It's been so much fun.
I want to go back to the moment where you had your baby. And that kind of life just became a little too, it became difficult to raise a child and work at that startup because it was so fast paced. Tell me what the company was doing to help, if anything, and we're not attempting to badmouth them, but I just want to see what reason. Support.
Yeah, there's no reason to badmouth this company. They were extremely supportive, extremely progressive. I had 4 months off of paid leave, which is extremely gracious for a company of that size. Like, we had only, 20 people, at that time. And, I was kind of the wearer of all hats. And so I'm sure for, the, executive management, it was really scary to let go of me for 4 months and kind of, offload a lot of the, responsibilities that I had. But they were so supportive. So gracious. They threw me a baby shower and made me like custom onesies for the baby. Like, it was, the best situation that, I think a first-time working mother could ask for. But, as much as I wanted it to work out, just the realities of, going back to work. So we were also fortunate enough to find a full-time daycare center. Because I had gotten on wait lists, like, while the baby was still 2 months in utero.
Oh my gosh.
So, we had full-time daycare, but my daily schedule was wake up at 6, leave the house at 7, get to work at 8, leave at 5 on the dot, battle traffic for an hour, pick up the kid before the daycare closes at 6, try to make dinner and eat it between 6 and 7, put the baby to bed at 8, wake up every 2 hours thereafter until 6 a.m. again, and repeat. And it takes a toll on you physically, mentally, emotionally, just to think about like, okay, this hour that I'm in the car, this is an hour I could be spending with my child, or these 9 hours that I'm at work. During these 9 hours, my kid is taking his first steps or learning his first words, and they weren't taught by me. Like that really takes a toll on you, I think, emotionally as a first-time parent, especially. And then kids who go to daycare get sick a lot.
Yeah. So I've heard.
Yeah, and then you're using all of your vacation time to take a day off because kids aren't allowed back into daycare for 24 hours after they get, a cold or something. So
and daycares are so expensive, so it's like you're working just to put that money towards it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think I had gone back to work for about six months, and then I was like, I just can't do this anymore.
Yeah, that's tough.
And yeah, so as much as I wanted it to, just the realities of the sleep deprivation and the necessity of needing more flexibility, and just personally wanting to be more available, I just couldn't work in a typical 9-to-5 job.
Yeah, I think that, and this is probably a discussion for another time, but I actually interviewed another lawyer a few weeks ago. She was a partner at a big firm, and she had already had one child, and she wanted to have a second one, and she just didn't see how she could make it work being a partner and having a second kid. So she actually walked away and just, I think her husband worked overseas, so they ended up going. She had another kid, but now she's kind of vocal about women not leaving the practice of law just to have children, and not in a negative way. I think she promotes the fact that it's possible to do it. Of course, you have to work somewhere that is flexible, but yeah, so it's a whole other discussion of women leaving to have children and how they come back or how can they make it work. But I think, I don't know, I think as more and more lawyers our age, so millennials, start having kids, I think they are, at least I hope they are, either working at law firms that are flexible and work with them, or they're kind of carving their own path and making it work, whether it's opening a practice or, I don't know, leaving for a while, taking part-time positions. So it's good to hear that so for you, it was just opening your own practice and kind of building it from there.
So that's really interesting you mentioned going overseas because, as I mentioned, my husband is from Japan. And for us, when we got married, the end goal was always to return to Japan. And so now that our kid is 2 and we want to have a second child, we kind of came to the the conclusion that it's just not feasible in Los Angeles to pay for a second daycare for me to take 4 months, or now I can't even take time off because I run my own firm, right? So for us, actually, the plan is to move to Japan within the next, by the end of 2020, to enable us to, have a second child. But I think a huge benefit for me is, like I said, as long as I have internet connection, I can keep doing my job. And so I fully intend on maintaining my practice, on delivering, the same level of service that I do to, my current clients. It's going to take a little bit of restructuring and optimizing my processes. I fully believe that, it's possible, and the nature of legal work is changing to facilitate that kind of lifestyle. So
yeah, I can see it working. Yeah. And I love that you're waiting until 2020. We need to make sure that Trump is not reelected, because if he is, that might throw off the plans, right? He might stick around a little bit longer. So kind of jumping forward to the esports. I love that you took this of-counsel position with, I believe the firm is called ESG Law?
Yep.
Okay. And that stands for Electronic Sports and Gaming.
Correct.
So you took an of-counsel position. You had kind of no reservations, because you have your own practice. There's no reason not to take on. It's just more work, right? It's just, why not, more opportunities. So the world of esports is it's somewhat new, right? It's kind of...
Yeah, so esports has actually been around for decades.
Okay.
I would say since the 90s. It started with this game called StarCraft. It was actually really big in South Korea, which is kind of like the birthplace of modern esports.
Okay.
But in recent years, it's really taken a foothold in North America with, I would say, 2, 3, 4 particular games, specifically. The first one being League of Legends, second one being the Overwatch League, which is fairly new. Third one, CSGO, or Counter-Strike Global Offensive, has been around for a long time. Also, PUBG is fairly new and just started their first professional kind of league this year. But these games are played at a professional level, and these players are the best in the world. They come from Australia, they come from South Korea, China, all throughout Europe, and they play for prize money in the millions.
Yeah.
The competitions are held in major venues like Madison Square Garden, Mercedes-Benz Arena. Like, it's not just a bunch of ragtag kids, gathering in someone's garage to, see who is the best. This is really, it's a world-class competition, and I would say in its early years, maybe like, 10 years ago, it was more of that kind of like ragtag, kind of small community feeling. But now it's truly risen to the level of, I would say the NBA and, Major League Baseball and the NFL, where you've got team owners, managers, brand sponsorships with companies like AT&T and BMW sponsoring these teams. The Overwatch League is broadcast on ESPN and Disney channels. So it's definitely an industry and a community that can't be ignored anymore.
No, it's getting more and more legitimate, and I don't know too much about it, just a little, like, maybe enough to be dangerous, I guess. But would these players consider themselves athletes?
To be honest, I don't think the players themselves consider themselves athletes. So before I send my clients into interviews, I always do a practice interview over the phone or through web chat. And one question I always have them practice answering is, what kind of visa are you applying for? And the actual visa classification is called a P1A, Internationally Recognized Athlete.
Okay.
And so when I say, oh, you're applying for an athlete visa, they're like, what? Really? Like, I just play video games. Yeah. So I don't think they consider themselves athletes. Like, they wouldn't use the word athlete, but they do use the word player, which I think is more, it makes sense. They're playing a game.
Right. Like, what do you do in terms of immigration? What are the legal aspects of everything that they're doing?
Sure. So when a player is signed to a U.S. team, and a lot of the competitions are held in the United States, since they're being paid by a U.S. company, they need work authorization. They need a visa to legally be able to accept money for providing a service in the United States. And the best vehicle for that is the P1A, Internationally Recognized Athlete Visa. And it's kind of interesting where, immigration doesn't list the sports that would qualify someone to be an athlete. The requirements are more generic, like whether the person has competed in an international competition, or whether the person is ranked in their sport, or whether the person has been recognized in a sports media outlet as being someone who has an international reputation. And all of those things readily apply to esports.
Oh, totally.
Like League of Legends and Overwatch are regularly covered by ESPN.com.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, the games are broadcast on live television. There are, global rankings for these players and their teams. So it's, very, I would say, I want to say it's very easy to classify them as professional athletes according to immigration regulations. But, like, just starting 3 months ago, don't know why, there has been, like, immense pushback from immigration against giving visas to esports players. Okay. So I would, I had, for the past 9 months, I had been filing these applications by the dozens and getting them approved, without a problem. But just around January 2019, I started getting what's called requests for additional evidence, and even some denials of cases that would have been approved, like, hands down, just a few months ago. And I'm like, the laws haven't changed. What has changed? So I went back to the regs.
Okay.
And the regulations didn't change, but the manuals that the adjudicators rely on to make the decisions have changed.
Okay.
It's a really unusual change, but basically an adjudicator has a manual, and there's like one chapter for B visas, another chapter for E visas. There's a chapter for every visa category, and the introduction to every single chapter now references President Trump's Buy American, Hire American executive order.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it insinuates, I haven't memorized it, but to paraphrase, it says that, according to President Trump's executive order, it is with the spirit and mind of preventing visa fraud and abuse that we kind of vigilantly apply the immigration laws of the United States.
Okay.
Which is kind of, to me, code language for let's try to find every way possible to deny this person instead of just kind of objectively looking at the evidence.
Yeah.
And so that happened in January of this year, and it has definitely had a tangible impact on my practice and on the clients that I service.
I think that's, it's interesting you say that. I think a lot of Americans, I don't know, I don't know if I can speak on everyone's behalf, but I think a lot of people just think, oh, a lot of these laws or a lot of these things that the president is doing don't affect me. But I think a lot of lawyers are feeling the effect.
I hadn't realized it before, President Trump's ascent, but how much power the executive branch has in implementing the laws, of the land.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, during President Obama's administration, there was a lot of kind of pushback saying, well, President Obama can't enact DACA. President Obama can't affect immigration law through executive orders. But now that President Trump is in administration, there's kind of no pushback on that. Through executive orders, the immigration policies that President Trump has changed is, to quote unquote, the Muslim ban. Again, the Buy American, Hire American executive order. These are all, in my opinion, within his power to do until they're challenged for their constitutionality, which the courts have already ruled that, the quote unquote Muslim ban can stand. Buy American, Hire American, has not really been challenged in the courts. Okay. So, it was a awakening for me to know that my vote maybe actually does matter, right?
Right. Yeah. No, and I think that's probably a great takeaway from this conversation, right? It sounds like it's definitely an interesting time to be in the immigration space, especially as an immigration attorney. And I love that you've been able to apply what you know and your experience in immigration to esports, which I think, again, is becoming more and more mainstream. It seems like it's been around for a little while. Tell me a little bit about aside from just falling in love with the law in this space and immigration, tell me a little bit of your personal experience with it, because I know we've spoken about this before, where you had mentioned that you wanted to kind of you had asked me whether we should start a podcast or write a blog, or remember that conversation?
Yeah.
And I asked you, what would it be about? And you mentioned this beautiful story about just wanting to share the story of, I believe it was your dad, right? Or both of your parents, and how they're immigrants. You're Korean American, I believe, right? So tell me a little bit more about your parents and their immigration story.
Sure. So I am a direct product of chain migration. So my aunt, my mom's sister, studied abroad in the United States from South Korea. And then while she was here, she met and married a Korean American. And through that became a permanent resident, got her U.S. citizenship. And then she sponsored my grandmother. Then my grandmother came over, became a permanent resident, got her citizenship. And then she, in turn, sponsored her 6 other children.
Wow.
And that's how my mom came to come to the United States.
Okay.
And she had graduated from like the Harvard of South Korea. She was a nurse, and she came here because at the time like Korea's political situation was kind of rocky, and she thought, okay, I'll have more opportunity in the United States. So she came here to work as a nurse. And right around that time, she also, was getting married to my father, and so my father came. I don't think he had any intention of ever, he hadn't even dreamed of living in the United States. But this woman that he fell in love with was like, see ya, I'm moving to America. So he was like, oh shoot, I better, not let this one go.
Yeah.
And so they came in the early 80s. I was born here in the United States, and the rest is history.
So tell me why you thought it was important to, and I don't know if you've already started working on this project or it's still something that is kind of on the back burner, but why did you think it was important to document the stories of your parents and their experiences?
Sure. So it's kind of morbid, but I think just out of curiosity, I had asked my mom or my dad, like, what was, so-and-so relative's name? Or my cousin had dug up some pictures from like the 1920s of our, relatives in Korea or Japan or Manchuria. We had no idea. And then we came to the realization that everybody who would have known the origin of this photograph is now dead. And no one, while those people were alive, had thought to like record those stories for prosperity.
Right.
And I was like, oh shoot, like I need to ask my parents more questions and either write them down or record them so that, I'm not going to trust my memory to be able to tell my kids and their kids and so on. So it became first just personally important for me to make sure that my family history was documented for prosperity. But then second, kind of taking on a bigger meaning of kind of humanizing immigrants. Just the other day, I think President Trump tweeted that, the people coming from Central and South America, he likened them to animals. And I just vehemently disagree with that. And I think, we have to remember, like, we're all people. We're all, daughters and mothers and sisters and brothers. And so I felt like if more people could know the stories behind the immigrants, it would help kind of, reconnect us as human beings.
Yeah. It sounds like it's very similar to Middle Eastern, just parents and families where we don't necessarily, like I never asked my parents much about I don't know much about them as kids, and I've never really thought about asking, I guess. So it sounds like it's very similar where parents kind of just keep their stories to themselves.
Right.
But there is a rich history there.
Absolutely.
And it's just thinking about like their experiences of having come here at whatever age they came. Like personally, my parents came here when my mom was 16 and my dad was maybe like 19.
Yeah.
So they were fairly young and they went to school here. Wow. And I was born here too, but I know vaguely about why they came here, but it's just kind of interesting. So it really is on us to ask the questions and talk to our parents and get the stories while they're still around and while we still can. But I think what I love more is wanting to humanize immigrants. And I think that it's so easy to just kind of toss that word around now and not really, and just lump people into one big immigrant pool and just, you forget that these are just humans, right? Yeah. And we're all trying to just do the best that we can. Yeah. And we got lucky that we were born here, right? Sure. Many people would consider that lucky. So I think that's really interesting. Is that something that you still plan on doing? Like what's going on with that?
It's there's so many projects that I have, kind of on my to-do list, and it's still something like on my bucket list to do before I die. But just right now with kind of the upheaval in U.S. immigration policy, a lot of my time and efforts are focused on actually doing pro bono work for my clients, just to make sure that the government is not doing unlawful things. Yeah. So we're starting to actually sue the government to enact the laws fairly. Wow. So that's been taking up a lot of my time, but it's still no big deal. But I fully intend on, whether it's writing a book or just recording a podcast or whatever, just somehow documenting those stories.
Yeah. I mean, I would urge you to do that soon.
Yeah.
Because it's not just a matter of your time, but
Right.
it's your parents as well, right? I think that's beautiful. And I think that is something that a lot of people, a lot of other children of immigrants or second generation, I don't even know what's first generation if you're born here.
I think it's different for like each like ethnic groups.
So Koreans consider the first generation to like set foot in the United States is first generation. We also have something, so I'm second generation because I was the second generation to be in the United States, even though I was born here.
Okay.
We also have something interesting called 1.5 generation, which is like probably someone like your parents, like when they came when they were fairly young, like junior high school. So they're not quite Korean, they're not quite American, they're 1.5.
Right.
So that's, yeah.
I like that. So I read this quote I read this statement on your website that I really liked and it stuck out, and I wanted to ask you about it. So I think it's on your About page. One of the last things that you list is this statement. You say that you're eager to work with the next generation of immigrants to the U.S. And I just thought I love that because it kind of shows where you're coming from. Like you really think, like you see the people who are coming to the U.S. as people who are going to contribute to our economy, to our culture.
Yeah, hands down.
I guess tell me more about why you thought that was important to put on your website and why you want people to know that about you.
Yeah.
So I probably didn't put that much thought into it when I wrote it, but it has taken on more meaning for me as I've, been, establishing my solo practice for the past year or so. We were just talking about generations. There is a generation of, for example, Japanese Americans who came at the turn of the century who had an extremely different experience and story from Korean immigrants who came in the late 1970s, early 1980s, who have a completely different story from, the current DACA recipients who came when they were 1 year old from Central and, South America. So every generation of immigrants has a unique story. And I think, I practice in a very narrow field of immigration. And so for me, like the generation of immigrants that I'm supporting and helping on their visa journey is, usually engineers or doctors or other people who have a very high and, valuable skill set to the United States, economy,
right.
Helping them come here and attribute, their education and their accomplishments and their research to the United States. That's, I fully believe that immigrants can only add to our country instead of taking away. And even if an immigrant ends up on welfare, yes, they might be taking money from government coffers, but, you can't put a number on the non-economic or non-tangible contributions that they're making by, adding to a diverse nation or adding, whether it's a food culture or music culture or language culture. There's so much more than is this person adding or taking money away from the economy.
Right.
I think like the most telling story, one of my clients has a startup company that works in a material called graphene. And graphene is like this Nobel Prize winning like carbon like material that is like extremely, basically a major application of it is you can make extremely thin film that will like purify water. Like I'm so science dumb, like I can't even explain it. But
I get it.
So one of the major applications would be if there's an oil spill like in the open ocean. You could like put this film in the water and it would just like clean it up like no problem, just like that. And this technology, which is continually being developed, he's working to utilize this technology in consumer products and making it more applicable to as many applications as possible in the United States. And immigration was giving us such a hard time on his case. And finally, I was just so fed up because I felt like they had no reason to challenge this application. I like wrote in the conclusion, like, if you don't approve this visa, he is going to take his technology, his business, his tax dollars, his brain to Canada, where they will welcome him with open arms, and Canada is going to benefit from the jobs he's creating, from the tax dollars he's contributing, from Canada's going to be able to say, like, we're the first, this Canadian company was the first to commoditize graphene. Like, come on, America, like, you don't want to let this guy go. So
people want to just put that in the application.
Yeah, so like I just don't understand the pushback against immigration when it's only like a win-win situation for the United States.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're of the same mindset, but I'm sure there are many of people, maybe listeners, even lawyers who probably would not agree with that. But no, I think that we can only benefit from having, like you said, diversity, right? And just diverse talents. Tell me a little bit about so you were born here, you grew up here. Tell me about your experience with, I guess, belonging. Did you kind of find a Korean community to belong to, or tell me more about that?
That's a really interesting question. So I'm Korean American. I look like 100% Asian, but, I guess I talk like an American. I grew up in Torrance, which is kind of a very unique, I call it a utopia. It's really the best place on earth to live.
Really?
Yeah.
I used to teach at El Camino.
Oh yeah, so
which is right there.
Torrance, it's close to the beach, it's close to the mountains, it's close to Orange County, it's close to downtown. It's a big city, but it's got a small town suburban feel. The schools are great. But the food is great, and I think it's because it's such a diverse community. You've got huge populations of, Latinos, Asian Americans. It's actually, I think, got one of the largest Japanese American populations in North America.
Okay.
And I think because of that, like, I never grew up feeling like I was an outsider. I definitely had moments of like, why do I have to go to Korean school on Saturday when everyone else is playing, soccer at AYSO? But I never felt like, if you look at my senior year, the homecoming court, it's like the perfect picture of diversity. Like, you had Pakistani American homecoming king. You had a African American homecoming prince. Like, it's truly like this utopia. And to be honest, like, in Torrance, it was like the Asians are the cool kids. I was homecoming queen and prom queen, right? And it's interesting, like, when I tell that when that just comes up in conversation with like people who grew up in Virginia, they're like, what? Like, that would never happen in my high school, not in a million years.
Oh man!
But in Torrance, it's kind of the norm.
It's common,
So I would say I've had the privilege of not ever having faced, racism or ever being, considered an other until I was, I think, in law school, and I took a trip to St. Louis to visit my boyfriend, now husband, who at the time was finishing up his master's degree at the University of St. Louis, Missouri. And just like we were walking down like the street, trying to grab dinner, and like someone walked by us and was like, "Ching Chong Ling Long," and I was like,
"Oh wow,
whoa, like this actually happened."
Yeah, it's like weird.
Yeah,
I'd be like,
I was
strange.
like, did that just happen to me? And it wasn't a one-off thing. Like later on, we went to Walmart, and then like the lady at the register who was ringing us up, who had this lively conversation with the guest before us. When it came to our turn, she just kind of like shut down. And then when I like asked her a question, she looked at me like, "Oh my gosh, you speak English?"
Yeah.
So
wow.
Yeah, it was the first time in my life where I had felt that. But I think, again, because of my upbringing in a very diverse community, like I just kind of let it roll off my back.
Yeah.
And I think that's also different for my brothers too, like being Asian American men, like they have a very different experience of being, dealing with their, ethnicity, dealing with their gender and masculinity.
Interesting.
Like I remember a couple years back, there was a school shooting at Virginia Tech, and the shooter happened to be a Korean American with like, he had a shaved head or something. And I think my brothers, they're also kind of like big Korean guys, and they had like, you know, fades, and they had kind of like a buzz cut. They were at the gas station, and they just felt very, like, immediately after the shooting, they felt very uneasy. They're like, they felt like they were being watched. And kind of, I think for a period after that, they felt like they had to represent the Korean American male community just by being, you know, stand-up citizens.
Right.
And that's something that I've never had to kind of do.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting question.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think about that often. I think, and I don't think I've really had this conversation with that many people, actually. Just one other friend of mine who is a belonging strategist. She kind of teaches lawyers about inclusion and diversity and belonging. So I went to 2 different high schools. One, the first 2 years I was in Ohio, a very, very white area, especially the town I lived in. And then the last 2 years I went to Arcadia High School, which was predominantly Asian. And then I also grew up in Lebanon, so I went to school there, also in the U.S. So I've always felt like I didn't belong anywhere. Didn't belong in Lebanon. I was the white girl in Lebanon, quote unquote. I was the Lebanese girl here. In Ohio, I wasn't white. Over here, I wasn't Asian. I've never. So I've always like struggled with finding my people. And for some reason, Lebanese people don't really live in one area the way that like Armenians do. Like the way that most other ethnic minorities do. So I've never had my people, and I'm always interested to hear other ethnic minorities' experiences with that. So
yeah, I think, you know, people's experiences are like, we can't just say, oh, all Korean Americans, you know, have had the same experience. Like, you know, between me and my brothers, we're the same generation. We were all born here, but just by being a different gender, you know, they have a completely different experience. So I think that's why it's so important to talk to people and get their stories, because everyone is different. You know?
Yeah, and there's certainly someone out there who definitely is going to identify. So, Genie, how can people find out more about you and find you online?
Sure. So my website is immigrant.la. I'm also pretty active on Twitter. Just look for Genie Doi. Like, my Twitter handle is a hot mess. Other than that, you can also find me at esglaw.com.
I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for being here, for sharing your story, your background, and I really hope you're able to someday soon put together those stories of your parents, because again, I think a lot of people can benefit from listening or watching or however you put them together.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, thanks.